Good morning, everyone. I would also like to extend my thank you for the invitation and for the warm welcome in Copenhagen to Yvette and to Christina. And I thoroughly enjoyed all the papers so far, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. As the world watches the scale of the atrocities committed by Russia's war in Ukraine, we are witnessing the rapid fall of Russia as a great power on a global stage. With this paper, I wish to set Russia's geopolitical influence in a historical context, drawing attention to the Cold War period, when the Soviet Union was held up as the standard bearer of national liberation and anti-imperialism in a post-colonial world. Slogans really that have been replaced by the ideology of fascism in today's Russia. By acknowledging the complexity of Soviet ambitions as a leader in a fight against imperialism, a narrative that Christina has already alluded to in her introductory remarks of the interwar period and the campaign of the multiple campaigns of Communist International, my paper will provide a kind of continuation in chronology of the historical context for Russia's now neo-imperialist or re-imperialist, I think that Michal said, policy now, and the most recent attacks on the national sovereignty of Ukraine. My focus will lie on Soviet engagement with the new regime of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt to draw out the political, economic, and cultural entanglements between the Soviet Union and the post-colonial world, by tracing the cultural production of the collective body in the arts defined by the discourses of nationalism, realism, and socialism. And this is just one example by Hamed Owais on the right. And I'm comparing here for some context of a work produced in a similar period by Alexander Deineka, who you have already seen in the intro remarks of Christina. This is Deineka's kind of the proponent and poster boy, I don't know if I may say that, of socialist realism of the interwar period. This is Deineka depicting peacetime constructors and new urban town planning from 1959. And this is a sketch for a much larger scale mosaic, which was exhibited in Moscow in 1960. So these two works by the Soviet Deineka and the Egyptian Hamed Owais share some aspects, first of all, of subject matter, but also of visual language. Both represent and document workers in state construction and modernization projects. On the right, Owais depicts the Aswan Dam, which became a celebrated success story of socialist socio-economic development modeled on the Soviet Union. It was also funded by the Soviets and built with the help of Soviet engineers. Both works, the Deineka and Owais, were commissioned to document these large-scale state construction projects. In the Soviet case already, the kind of panel housing constructions initiated by Nikita Khrushchev. And this is a photograph, a documentary photograph of the construction site of the Aswan High Dam, which was built in the decade of the 1960s and finished in 1970, just with the death of Nasser. And on the right, to add to this now kind of typology of friendship monuments that we've already witnessed, is a Egyptian-Soviet friendship monument, which was commissioned and produced by Ernst Neizvestny in 1971. And it was in 1961 that Ernst Neizvestny was critiqued by Nikita Khrushchev for his formalism and kind of avant-garde, non-realist visual language in sculpture. But here we can see the friendship monument that is built in the shape of a lotus flower, a kind of tower that encircles a memorial, a friendship memorial that is 71 meters high, that stands on the edge of the Nile, and is a very different kind of abstract language of friendship that was gifted not to the fraternal brothers of the Soviet republics, but on a very much external world stage of the post-colonial world in Egypt. And this is Gamal Abdel Nasser, who is standing on top of the mausoleum in Moscow in 1958. And Nikita Khrushchev, who returned his visit in 1964 to witness the stage of the construction of this large-scale industrial project of the building of the dam. So these high-profile visits by heads of state are just instances of a vast project of global Soviet engagement, which resulted in the bilateral circulation of art, people, and ideas alongside military and financial aid, with the aim of extending Soviet influence and socialist ideology in the global south. So these two works by Owais on the Aswan Dam and the Hull of the Machine, produced in the 1960s, were exhibited in Moscow and in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, in the 1970s. For a Soviet audience to kind of parade and celebrate this friendship with Egypt, but also Soviet involvement in the large-scale construction of the dam. Like in Owais' paintings, the Aswan Dam is seen by the workers who took part in the construction, a joint Soviet-Egyptian workforce. Owais' documentation of the construction of the Aswan High Dam reflects how art and culture evolved with economic projects and interests. There are instances where the figures of the composition become abstracted in relation to the machine and scaffolding that we see here, a stylistic device reminiscent of Fernand Léger, but also refers back to the American regionalism of Thomas Hart Benton and the Mexican muralists. The body parts of the workers begin to mimic the machines and an act of technical labor that is depicted. Owais is commonly associated with the socialist ideology of Nasser's regime. His work focused on the working class and the revolutionary struggle. Here we see an early portrait of Nasser following the army's officers' coup in 1952, which brought Egypt into independence, the nationalization of the Suez Canal, and the successful defense against the British, French, and Israeli forces. Gamal Abdel Nasser, where he is wearing a pinstripe suit, stands tall as a leader of the Arab world. Owais was born in a small village and trained as a metal worker, and was thus an ideal progressive artist of peasant origin. Applauded as a progressive artist of the Arab countries, his work was discussed in Moscow as opposition to Western stylistic tendencies of expressionist deformation and abstraction. In the eyes of the Soviets, Owais's work was characteristic of the struggle for realism and for post-colonial liberation at large. So you can see that here his work was instrumentalized in support of a particular narrative that the Soviet Union sought to project, not only externally, but also to its own people. So what Owais's work shows is a formation of a new national art on the basis of realism, which challenged both the influence of bourgeois modernism and a static definition of socialist realism. Egyptian modern art provided fertile ground for a re-engagement with the dictum of socialist in content and national in form, which is a dictum for socialist realism, and was, in fact, not very clear in its articulation. And in this post-war period, Egyptian artists and the work of Owais was allowed for a rethinking in response to the agendas of Soviet internationalism during Cold War of kind of realism and what socialist realism should look like. So to give you a little bit more context and show some more images, Moscow became a magnet for advocates of socialist internationalism from the post-colonial world, whose attention Soviet officials and intellectuals actively sought in order to promote USSR as a leader in the defense of peace, humanism, and anti-colonialism. Here you see a multicultural group exploring Moscow sites during the 6th International Youth Festival of Youth and Students in 1957. And an earlier 1952 poster by Nina Vatolina, which points to the central role of Russians amongst the collective, this kind of hierarchy that Christina has already alluded to. And this, of course, returns to Lenin's project of world revolution and his vision for an association of autonomous, equal Soviet republics that was in the post-war period invoked in the popular imagination of Soviet people again to serve this particular agenda of internationalism. After the October Revolution, the Bolsheviks were the only state to support anti-colonial causes abroad against Western imperialism, and this is very much what the Soviet Union took up during this period and placed and it was manifested in international solidarity propaganda campaigns with posters such as this that you see here, but also this one, and you've seen the work on the right by Viktor Koretsky, a poster, and another poster by Koretsky on the left, which is kind of a memorialization of Patrice Lumumba, the Congolese leader who was assassinated in 1961. So this propaganda campaign of solidarity and friendship, so not necessarily fraternity, but friendship with those oppressed by the colonial rule. So these posters are a visual response to the new geopolitical context defined by the death of Stalin in 1953 and the 1955 Bandung Conference, events that saw a reconfiguration of the world order with a new and coordinated injection of relations between the second and the third worlds. And it was at the Bandung Conference that the Third World was inaugurated as a project of cooperation, anti-colonial solidarity, and world peace. And it was also followed by the non-aligned movement that was established in Belgrade in 1961. And it was Egypt played a very important role in both of these organizations. And so in this geopolitical context of non-alignment that was propagated by Egypt, and the Soviet Union really tried to realign its own agenda to become part of it, the sphere of art and culture provided a vital form of communication and transmission of ideas for the world of new alliances, bringing people from diverse cultures and geographies together under the pretext of international exhibitions and festivals. And this is another poster for the 6th World Festival of Youth and Students, that you see on the picture here. And it was perhaps the most ambitious event to date that would successfully position the Soviet Union as a leader of socialist internationalism. Moscow welcomed 34,000 guests from 131 countries for a 2-week period, symbolizing a shift in Soviet foreign policy from socialism in one country under Stalin to a peaceful coexistence during this period of the thaw, the warming of relations during the period of Khrushchev. There was, of course, art that was displayed as part of this big festival. The International Exhibition of Fine and Applied Art coincided with the festival in Gorky Park. And this is a list of really kind of the great international scope of this event to give you a sense of the kind of world art and the history of art. An attempt of a universal history of art that was projected and displayed by the Soviets. In this exhibition, it was the Egyptian artist Gamal El-Saghini who received a gold medal for his relief Freedom that appeared as a symbol of post-colonial struggle in the Soviet press. And this copper relief was purchased for the collection of the Pushkin Museum of Arts. And the prisoner who rises from his knees and breaks free contains this kind of monumentality. This is the relief printed, and it was printed in multiple reproductions during the period. A kind of suggesting promise and potential for this monumentality, for this collective body of freedom and liberation that was at this point supported by the Soviet Union. And the relief was read literally and constituted not just Egyptian identity, but became a symbol of the fight against colonial oppression at large. So the figure of the Egyptian peasant, or the fellah, the land of the fellah that you see by Hamed Owais on the left, and another woman artist, Ingi Eflatun, on the right, celebrates ordinary people of Egypt and produce an engaged art for a mass audience. Ingi Eflatun was the first Arab woman artist to be exhibited in the Soviet Union, and this is her on the cover of a Soviet magazine published in Egypt in 1976, and she is standing on the Red Square against the backdrop of Kremlin spires as a symbol of Soviet-Arab solidarity. She visited Moscow 5 times and is recognized globally as an activist, a feminist, and a modernist painter. Since 1967, Aflatoon's work was exhibited in Cairo, Alexandria, Rome, Paris, São Paulo, Venice, Warsaw, and also Moscow. So you can see that she was she was playing both the ideological divides by displaying both in the West and in the Soviet Union. She was a committed Marxist and joined the Communist Party at the age of 18 and wrote political pamphlets and on issues of class, gender, and against imperialist oppression. She was, in fact, imprisoned by NASA for her communist activities in 1959 and remained in prison for 4.5 years. And this is something that, well, first of all, it shows that Egypt wasn't, although it was not anti-communist, it also was itself playing both sides of the agenda, making projects with the US, but also the Soviet Union. But it also shows that the Soviet Union chose to display her work at the same time. This is just a few more examples, and I won't go into in detail because I'm out of time, but I'm wrapping up to say that her work in the Soviet Union was received and celebrated on the one hand as modern and progressive and focusing on agricultural labor. It was national in form, but it was also decorative. So in the reception of her work, we see a very much gendered approach. Her work was exhibited in the Museum of Oriental Art and not in the more prestigious State Museum of Pushkin Art, which shows that, again, this relationship with post-colonial artists was also kind of part manipulated. And these are some more images of her in Moscow, walking around bookshops and the main streets. And lastly, an image from her 1975 exhibition catalogue, which shows her painting of Angela Davis right here, something that again refers back to the introduction. It's her work in honor of Angela Davis from 1972. And Davis, in fact, undertook a 2-week trip to the USSR after her acquittal in 1972 and traveled to Moscow, Leningrad, Tashkent, and Samarkand. And what this shows is that the work of Inci Aflatoon and also the icon figure of Angela Davis as a defender of black power and women's rights are joined in Moscow in this kind of transnational context. So to conclude, what this shows is that Aflatoon had her own agenda when visiting the Soviet Union, but so did the Soviet Union itself. And what the Egyptian art did, a progressive and modern art of Egypt, is that it also shifted Soviets' own understanding of socialist realism and the role of realism in the context of a post-colonial world art. And socialist realism had to embrace these new visual languages. And what it also shows us is, as the geopolitical context of power is again being shifted and redrawn, and we're still, of course, watching the news every day. We need to assess and understand the role of art as an instrument of power that can be usurped, manipulated, and used, of course, as propaganda, as a method of soft power, but it can also be used as a means of resistance. So I would like to end on that. Thank you very much.